What is the biggest failed date you have ever had? Last year, I decided to text a cute girl that I had class with the previous term to try to set up a date. And she responded with something like, "Sure, I was hoping I'd hear from you again." She said she's a good bowler, so we agreed on bowling. And the day of the date rolled around the next week. She was sitting on the railing outside the bowling alley waiting. Then, when I got out of the car and smiled at her, she said, "Oh, hey, I wasn't expecting to see you here." I thought something might be up, but I couldn't think of a good response, so I acted like I wasn't expecting to see her either. I asked her if I should go inside and get a lane set up for us, and she said, "Yeah, sure, just hold on a bit. I asked another friend to meet me here." When I asked who it was, she told me that it was her friend that just so happened to have the same first name as me. I went inside and handed over some passes for free games, put on my shoes, then put our three names in the machine. I didn't want to just start without her, so after waiting for 10 minutes or so, I got a text from her saying, "Where are you? I really don't want to be stuck here with this guy I used to have class with." So I found out that my instincts were right. But as a bowler with free bowling passes that were about to expire, I wasn't about to just leave. I responded, "Sorry, family emergency. I can't make it." And a minute later, she came back inside and found me in whatever lane I was on. When I asked her about her friend, she told me that he wasn't coming. When I asked her if she was ready to start, she then told me, "I'll just watch. I don't really like to bowl. I only really came to watch my other friend. Supposedly he's a really good bowler." After that, I told her, "Well, if you're not going to bowl, there's not much of a point in staying. I was just going to practice for a match anyway." We said our goodbyes, and I never heard from her again. Well, that's one way to get a strikeout without even throwing a ball. Story 2. Okay, this is long, but I want to paint a picture here. The first date after the end of an LTR was with a guy from OkCupid. He seemed intelligent and sweet, so I agreed to go to a movie and then dinner with him. When I showed up at the theater, I looked around for the person I'd seen in the photos, but was quickly intercepted by a guy who was easily 350 plus pounds. You guessed it. It was him. He was wearing a t-shirt stained with food and with crumbs still around the collar, a t-shirt that wasn't large or long enough to cover the enormous belly that ballooned out over his too low on his hip shorts. His back was on display, even standing straight up, and he made no effort to fix this. I pride myself on not judging by appearances, especially because I'm not a small lady myself, but I wear clean clothes that fit me, and I expect the same of others. This guy was downright grotty. But I'm a nice person, so I swallowed my shock and smiled and went into the theater with him. He took up 2 theater seats for himself, despite the fact that his popcorn, and soon his fingers, were drenched in butter. He clearly wanted to hold my hand. I kept it conveniently out of reach. After the movie, we crossed the parking lot to Denny's. He ordered 2 entrees for himself, along with an appetizer of fried cheese, a good portion of which wound up dribbling onto his shirt. And he left one hand stretched across the table in a clear invitation for me to hold it. Still trying my very hardest not to be judgmental, I engaged him in conversation. It was actually fairly well spoken, but when we got onto the topic of social equality, he burned his last chance to prove himself a decent human being by saying, "Non-straight people can do whatever they want in their own houses. If they ever step foot on my property, I'm gonna fire those quicker than they can run." I drove him back to his car, across the large parking lot, and waited for him to get out. He didn't. He ignored my claims that I had to be up early the next morning and so had to leave. He just sat there, grinning at me and saying, "I had a great time tonight." He was obviously hoping for an invitation back to my place, which he wasn't getting. We sat there awkwardly for about 5 minutes with him throwing out not-so-subtle hints to me before I finally said, as friendly as I could, "Look, this was fun, but I really do have to go. Take care." After waiting hopefully for a few more seconds, he finally lifted himself out of my car, which immediately jumped back up several inches with a vacation of his weight, and watched me as I sped out of the parking lot. He called me on my way home. I ignored it. He called me again a half hour later. I ignored it again. Finally, he IM'd me and said, "I can already tell that I'm in love with you. I want to be exclusive. I don't want you seeing any other guys." Frustrated, I replied, "Look, this isn't going anywhere for me. I'm sorry. I just got out of an LTR and I'm not ready to commit to anyone yet. Besides, I think you and I would be better off just as friends." Not that I was interested in being this guy's friend, but I wasn't capable of being too hard on him by telling him to get lost forever. His response, "I can't just be friends with you because I'll always love you and want more." "Sorry," I said. Him, "Can you at least promise me not to date anyone else until you decide you're ready for a relationship again?" Me, "Absolutely not. That's not something I'd promise anyone. Him. Then I can't ever see or speak to you again because it'll hurt too much. And he logged off. Thank God. Or so I thought. Cue several weeks of him calling, texting, and IMing me, leaving me messages that implied that he had completely forgotten his vow to never speak to me again. He kept telling me how much he loved me, begging me for another date and claiming that he was going to try to find out where I worked so he could show up. I ended up blocking him in every way I possibly could. He then created a new OkCupid account to get around my block and send me more messages. I blocked that account too. I eventually stopped hearing from him, but Jesus Christ, that was a scary experience for someone who had just been on her first date in 10 years. Story 3. Oh boy. Well, I was about 18 and working in the city, New York, at my father's printing shop. I'd met this guy a few days before on a bus going upstate to visit my friend. I tell my father I'm leaving early to go hang out in the city with a friend and I'm just going to take the train home from there. I meet up with a guy and almost immediately, he's weird. Think Pepe Le Pew, like he's trying to get all touchy-feely and huggy-squeezy on the subway. Then he pulls out a disposable camera and asks if he can take my picture and tell people I'm his girlfriend. I, of course, say no. But I was a big people pleaser and didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I didn't end the date. But I couldn't wait to get away. This continued until we were walking down some random street and some lumpy witch waddled up to me and just started getting in my face. It was his girlfriend. I kid you not. We're in Midtown Manhattan and we just happened to pass her by hanging out with friends. I tell her to get out of my face because I had no idea he had a girlfriend and I'm actually relieved she decided to show up. He starts to follow me and I just turn around and say, "Dude, you really don't want to do that. Trust me." Since my train wasn't for a while, I decided to go back to the office to wait. When I got there, I found my father cheating on my mother with a woman he hired to help with the filing. Story 4. In high school, I went out on a date with a guy from a different town who went to an alternative high school. Well, sort of a date. He met me at Boomers, Dave & Buster's kind of place with outdoor go-karts and indoor arcade. You get the drift. To hang out with mutual friends. The date started with him making out with one of my male friends up against a pinball machine and ended with my mom dropping him off at his grandparents' house, where he insisted we come inside and see his pet iguana. His grandmother kept telling my mom her skin was so soft and attempted to pet her, while his grandfather sat in the corner facing the wall. I was in the most confused state I've ever been in my entire life. I didn't call him again, despite receiving multiple calls from him. A few weeks later, after the first date, I got a string of IMs from him telling me he was going to be coded on pills because he was in love with me. Deciding to err on the side of caution, I called 911 and IM'd him, telling him so. He IM'd me the next day, saying a bunch of BS about how I saved his life and that he was forever in my debt. For a while after that, about once a week or so, I would come home from school to a bouquet of roses on my doorstep. Then I came home once to his grandfather's car in the driveway. The grandfather gets out and tells me that I should just date his grandson already. He also told me that I was a witch for calling 911 when I should have just gone over to his house to check on him, since he was behind him at the computer telling him what to type, and also said that he had been the one dropping off the bouquets on my doorstep. Jesus Christ. Story 5. About 5 or 6 years ago, I met a girl that came into my work. I talked to her for a little bit. We seemed to really hit it off. She asked me if I wanted to go get dinner sometime. She said she'd come pick me up and everything. That weekend, we went out together to a restaurant on the other side of town. She was very interesting to me. I really didn't tell her a lot about myself because I kept asking her questions about the various things she was talking about. We just finished eating. I told her that I was going to get our meal since she drove us there. I just given the waiter my debit card when I blacked out. This has happened 2 other times in my life, so it's not common. After my seizure was over, everyone in the restaurant was around me. People were holding my legs and arms, everyone was scared and someone called an ambulance. I call it my down feeling. It's the mood I'm in after I have a seizure. Everything seems different and it's kind of hard to explain. In this state of mind, I get up to my feet. I looked all over the restaurant for her and she had already left. I thought she went to get help. I made the EMS people wait for her as long as I could. I tried calling her. I didn't get out of the hospital until 1 a.m. I had to walk 7 miles home because we don't have public transportation in this town. I never heard from her again after that. Story 6. A few years ago, I met a guy at a bar who was born on exactly the same day as me. That seemed like reason enough to accept his offer when he asked me out. He told me to dress up very nicely as we would be attending an art gallery opening. I got all dolled up and when he came to pick me up, he was in a t-shirt and jeans. Okay, maybe he had misunderstood the attire requirement. We got there and it was in a warehouse out in the middle of nowhere.
It was actually an art gallery, but barely. Some of his friends were there, but he wouldn't introduce me to them and proceeded to chat with them and ignore me the entire evening. Meanwhile, I'm dressed to the nines and they're also all in jeans. After we left, he asked me if he could take me out to dinner. I figured, whatever. At least I'd get a free meal out of this awful evening. We hit up a nice pizza joint and ordered a pizza. As I reached for a second slice, he just looked at me and said, "Wow, a second slice? Really? Jeez, you're a house." So I ate the rest of the pizza. At least you didn't have to worry about burning any calories that night. Story 7. My biggest fail of a date is when I met a girl one night at a party that one of my not-so-close friends was having. She was pretty attractive. She was really outgoing and fun to be with. So after the night of getting to know this woman, I was infatuated with her. So I decided to ask her on a date. She said, sure. So we went on this date, which she decided would be fun. She drove me to a huge bridge outside of the Loop in Chicago, and I was a little confused. I asked her what we were going to do, and she just said, wait. So I waited in silence for about a minute when she took my hand and squeezed it harder than the Hulk and started screaming and crying about how she wanted to end and give up on life. I tried to comfort her, but she just said I was a schmuck for not seeing that she was depressed earlier, so she ran in her car and drove away, leaving me 3 miles from the apartment. Story 8. Not as mortifying as some I've read, but by far my worst date. It was my first day with a guy I met online. We'd had some nice conversations and decided to meet up one night for sushi. The night started off well enough and I was really enjoying myself. About a half hour into the date, he starts getting a crap ton of texts and calls from who he claims is his dad. Being the slightly naive girl I was 4 years ago, I shrugged it off. But the texts kept coming. He never bothered to put his phone on silent and checked every single text. He said his dad wanted to go work out with him. At that point, I had a good handle on what was going on. Look, I told him, if you aren't into me, that's fine. But have the guts to tell me instead of relying on your buddy to bail you out. Actually, he replied while standing, it's a call. Thanks for dinner. And he left. I sat there for a little bit, embarrassed as hell because of all the sympathetic glances from other patrons. The server brought the check over. She leaned down to me and whispered, I heard what happened. I took that schmuck's order off so you only are paying for what you ate. That's when I started crying in the middle of the restaurant. I left the server a massive tip for her generosity and spent the rest of the night drowning my sorrows in wine, Ben & Jerry's, and Love Actually. Story 9. I was at a party once and got approached by a girl. She wanted to set up a double date with me and my buddy and her friend. My friend and I accepted. This date was kinda ugly, but he agreed to take one for the team. The day of the date, the ugly friend canceled on him, which was probably because it was just a setup for me and girl A in the first place. Okay, sure, we go on. So we set up a movie and went to see it. After the movie, she wanted to go back to her dorm or apartment complex and hang out with her pals. The day was going okay, so I agreed. It wasn't odd. College age. I was 20 or so. I think she was 22. So we hang with her roomies for a while. Things are okay. Then they want to get out, so they leave. I offer to leave, like a normal gentleman, and she indicates I should stay for a little. I agree. He put on another movie and I made a move to kiss her, and we kissed for a minute or so. Then, suddenly, she pulls away without warning and immediately gets really agitated. She wants to know where things are going, and before I can answer, she begins crying very, very hard. She goes off on a tangent for about an hour about all these very odd issues she's having and how nothing is right and all men are going to mistreat her and so on. Now, within the first minute of the freak out, I'm thinking, okay, this is over. Let's find an exit strategy. This girl is obviously not ready for anything. But this was a mistake, because I started asking questions out of morbid curiosity. As it turns out, I'm like the second person she's ever kissed, and how she's pure because her mother was super overbearing and never let her date, and told her all men were going to end her. She thinks because I kissed her that we have to have intimacy now, but first she wants to call my parents and make sure I'm not a criminal. Can she do a background check on me and see my grades? Oh, now wait, it's back to the intimate subject, and she says she wants to, but she's afraid and doesn't know what to do. And so at this point, I stop her. I tell her that I've had a few girlfriends in my time and that she's better off finding someone a little less experienced, since she's not. I tell her I'm not interested in intimacy right now, nor a relationship. Well, I totally was in both parts, but not with crazy people. I told her the connection between us was good. It's just not right for us to sleep together. She cries really hard again, but agrees that it's not the right time, not the right person, etc. I go home, chalk it up to a bad night. Now, mind you, all this girl had was my name and telephone number. I think she had the telephone number from my friend. The next morning at 7 a.m. or so, I get a knock on my door. I don't live on campus. I live way off campus with roommates. It's her. Now I'm freaking out because how did you find my house? She's got flowers with a card. She's still crying and she apologizes for her behavior the night before and wants me to wait to read the card until after she leaves. I agree and she tearfully walks away. I go inside. The card says, I'm paraphrasing of course, I really like you. I know I probably scared you away, but if you ever want to give it a chance, give me a call. Right about the time I think, well, maybe someday. An intensely loud pounding starts in the front door. I answer. It's her. She's screaming and in tears. I ask why, and she's livid at me for not reading the note and chasing after her. Now I'm thinking, what the hell, times 10 to the millionth exponent. But I calmly explain I need some time to think about it, especially since she just started trying to break down my door. She falls on the floor crying. I attempt to console her, and she flails at me and cries harder. I wait for like 10 minutes for her to stop crying, and she agrees to give me some time. She walks away again. It's not 30 seconds before the pounding on the front door starts again. This time, I'm done. I'm not going to answer. I explain what's happening to the roommates, and they don't answer either. She spends the next hour screaming threats at the front door, crying and pounding on the door. I was just about to call the police before she left. Next morning, she repeated the whole thing with a bigger bouquet and slightly less screaming, more pitiful crying, but it lasted only about 15 minutes because I threatened to call the police through the door and she called me names and ran away. I saw her only once more, about 5 years later, and after a friendly hi, she told me that she was really glad we hadn't dated because she had a new boyfriend now, and that I was probably never going to change my mind. The guy was there with her, and I'll admit she was a hottie, but the guy looked like Quasimodo. Story 10. The day was arranged by the college newspaper where I was attending school. I had never met, nor seen the person who I would be courting that night. I was only told that all expenses would be paid for. I was a college student. How could I turn down free food? We met up at a local Greek place while being followed by a film crew. She was great, charming, cute, funny, and could hold her own in conversation. However, much like that exact Lego piece that you really need in a tub full of Legos, her crazy was well hidden. After the meal, we went for a long walk on the beach. A few minutes in, she leans in close and whispers, "Let's ditch the film crew." When a fairly hot girl asks you to find a way to get to a secluded place, logic is overtaken by hormones. The second they turned their heads, we made a dash for it. We found a lifeguard tower that wasn't in use, and we made our way up the ramp. It was perfectly secluded, and it had the tactical advantage of being able to see if anyone was approaching. I leaned in for a kiss, expecting that was what she wanted. "Wait," she said. She was excited at this point, and she made no effort to hide it. "Do you want to see my scars?" "No biggie. I've had creepier things said to me, and I figured it was an excuse she was making. I was game. Sure." All across her stomach was deep, crazy scars. "Want to give me one?" What? What are these from?" "Memories. Give me one." She pulls out a weapon from her purse. The crazy was no longer hidden. "I've done it before. We'll just say that I fell while we were climbing the lifeguard tower. I think that the film crew found us. They were a good 50 yards away and were oblivious to the fact that they were there. I stood up and waved, faked a blush like we were being naughty as this chick with a weapon was hidden below me. She was not pleased and had a weapon. I was mentally saying goodbye to my currently not harmed body and was praying it would stay that way. The cameras were on though. She knew she had to play nice, lest her crazy be known to all. She hid the weapon, stood up and giggled. The day continued. We played laser tag. I elected not to give her my number at the end of the night. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 11. I met a girl online who seemed reasonably attractive and fairly easygoing, so I figured, hey, why not? We met at a local coffee shop and chatted for a few minutes before a mutual acquaintance of ours happened to show up out of nowhere and begin talking to the two of us. Turns out they were both in AA together, and I then proceeded to learn her long and sordid history of drinking problems, and the real reason for her wanting to date. Her exact words were, "I'm trying to replace my boyfriend who passed away this summer." So the guy decides to invite himself along for our date, neither of them asking me if it was cool for him to do so. We end up driving to a bar, a fine thing for a couple of recovering drinkers to do, and the entire time they're playing the absolute most god-awful music on the radio I can think of. I'm in the backseat, this horrible thing blaring over the speakers while the two of them are chatting, and I'm thinking to myself, dear God, how can I find a way to get out of this? So we go to the bar and they proceeded to drink coffee and play air hockey while I tried to think of a way to leave. I ended up faking a cell phone call for my friend, saying I needed to go because she was in the hospital. The girl then proceeds to freak out at me for bailing on her during our date, at which point I just stared blankly at her for a second, blinked, and walked away. Story 12. First date. Beautiful ice blue eyes, curly blonde hair, German as hell with a very thick accent. She was very skinny, but wearing baggy clothes, so I didn't think much of it. Germans wear weird stuff, right? The day goes awesome. We eat some food, during which she keeps going to the bathroom. Then we eat some ice cream, during which she also keeps going to the bathroom. Then we go for a walk and hold hands. And eventually we end up checking into a matrimonial suite at a youth hostel. We are making out when suddenly she stands up and backs away. Then she says, in her thick accent, "Don't you like what you see?" and takes off her clothes. It is at this point that I realize that she has a disorder. She starts begging me to have intimacy with her, and I think to myself, wow, this is really a pickle, as I have no attraction to her anymore. But I don't want to be a schmuck and have her put her clothes back on because she clearly has some major body issues. So I start kissing her, generally trying to both diffuse the situation while also not rejecting her. Somehow, an hour later, we ended up reclothed, holding hands, and fell asleep on the bed. I think I was pretty gentle about it, and we kept up in emails for a little while afterwards. She always seemed fairly positive towards me. Story 13. I had my first date ever in 9th grade, all planned out with a girl I really liked. When I was running through the plan with my friends, they reminded me how socially awkward I was, and that if I couldn't carry the conversation throughout the date, there wouldn't be a second one. So being the smooth guy that I am, I decided to prepare by Googling how to talk to a girl and conversation starters an hour or so before the date. But I was too nervous to memorize the questions, so I wrote them down on my palm for future reference. We went to a sushi place at her suggestion. Of course, I say I love sushi to convince her I am sophisticated and worldly gentleman, but I had never had the stuff before. Turns out that the green substance they put on the side of the sushi roll is not, in fact, guacamole. It is wasabi sauce, which I can only describe as a combination of horseradish, fire, and hell. So I ate the whole chunk of it, and there I am, practically sobbing and oozing out of my nose when I decide to distract her with a tactical conversation starter. The only problem is, my palms were too sweaty and all the ink had erased. I didn't notice while I was wiping the wasabi-induced storm off my face, so now my face was covered in ink while she stared blankly at me, wondering what to do. I saw myself in the reflection of the window, and I was in so much pain and so mortified that I just started crying. We ended up having to call my mom to pick us up early. Shut up. I was in 9th grade. I drove home in silence except for the oldie station my mom had playing on the radio. My mom let me use her sweater to wipe my face off. We ended up being friends later on in high school and laugh about it now. To this day, she thinks I was only crying from the wasabi. Well, that's one way to make a lasting impression. Story 14. I was working at a science fiction convention in the late 1980s as a roving security. I was paired up with this cute young woman, we'll call Alice. I felt she had potential. She was smart, witty, funny, and laughed at my jokes. It was obvious we were hitting it off. The only thing I worried about was that she looked a bit young, but she had to be over 18 to be working security, and they check ID. Near the end of our shift, we decided to go out and have dinner together. "I'll grab my purse back in my room and meet you in the lobby," she said. "Actually, I don't have anywhere else to go. Mind if I just tag along?" I asked. "Sure," she said, with a bright smile. My heart skipped a beat. On the way to her room, we talked and talked like we had been doing all shifts. She was doing flirty things like playing with her hair and biting her lower lip when we made eye contact, and we were both being comfortably dorky. When we got to her room, she said, "I'll be right back," and unlocked the door. When she opened the door, it was apparent her roommates were not expecting her, and it was apparent that Alice had no idea her roommates were into group intimacy. Truthfully, from what I could see, it was just about to start. There were people, there was a huge tarp, some scented oils, and a few of the women were fluffing the men. I don't think anyone in the room was under 180 pounds, and the few that were skinny were not the kind of skinny that one would find attractive to any era standards. Like a combination of cottage cheese and cauliflower with a few pretzel sticks mixed in. But to each their own, consenting adults all around. I looked at Alice, a little fearful that this was an intentional encounter, but when I saw her face, I saw her look more shocked than I was. Her jaw dropped and stuttered. Her face turned white and she almost fainted. Oh my God. Oh, no. Oh my God. Oh God. She looked at me, dumbstruck and white as a sheet. "You didn't think I would never be involved. Oh God." One of the women who was at the door went, "Oh, Alice, I didn't know you'd be back tonight. We were going to be done by 9 and, oh no. Oh dear." She threw on a towel and went to comfort Alice, who by now was sobbing and shaking in shock. Then the woman took Alice in and closed my door in my face like I wasn't even there. I wondered what just happened. Finally, I knocked on the door, then I heard Alice sob louder. The woman answered and said, "Punk, look, Alice is a little out of sorts. Let us calm her down and she'll meet you in the lobby." Okay. About an hour later, the woman found me. "Look, Punk, I'm so sorry. Alice is my niece and she was traveling with us. She had no idea this was going to happen and she wanted you to know she had no intent to bring you into our group. I mean, she's a little naive and we didn't expect her to return so early. I guess that's my fault. Alice decided to drive home. She doesn't approve of our games and it's probably for the best. I know her mother is going to have a fit, but sorry about all this. Alice really liked you, but I think we embarrassed her so badly she can't face you." I said I understood. I gave the woman my phone number to give to Alice. Never heard back from her. Story 15. So I met this girl at an over 30 nightclub. I'm 24 and pretended I was 30. She was 30. We arranged to meet up again the next day. I drive her over to hers on my motorbike. We meet up and go to this pub. Spend a while having a few drinks and stuff. She's mega in the mood the whole time. Go back to her house and end up in her room. Do all the dirty deeds imaginable. All good? That's not a fail. I hear you. Hold up. I'm pretty lucky in that I don't get hangovers. I do, however, get a really, really awful mess after a night drinking. As I mentioned, we met the night before, where I'd been drinking. I feel my stomach bubbling up. It's about 4 a.m. by now. She has 3 female flatmates, so it's so quiet in this place. If you dropped a needle, your ears would ring for minutes. I open her door, trying not to wake anybody. I'm there. The toilet is one small step directly across the corridor. I'm sitting there at this point on the loo, feeling my stomach whirling around. There's this funny thing I've since learned about missing. The quieter you try to be, the louder you are. It starts. It sounds like my back is exploding. Every time I release even a tiny bit, I'm making the loudest farting sounds you can imagine. I try turning the taps on. I flush the chain. There's literally nothing I can do to drown out the sound of me. It just goes on and on and on. I give up trying to be quiet. Her toilet is destroyed. I begin to laugh to myself. The loudest mess of all time. Why now? Eventually, I finished up. I open the door and take the tiny step across the corridor to her room. She's sitting upright in her bed. "I think you better go." "Me too," I reply. "What the hell did you eat?" she inquires. I grab my clothes and start to leave. She seems to have a change of mind all of a sudden. "You don't actually have to go." Anyway, I get on my bike and make my way home. In the middle of the motorway, my bike cuts out. It's 5 a.m. I check my phone. I ended up going to sleep on the side of the road. The end. Story 16. I am a 25-year-old male. I let a friend set me up on a blind date. She told me this girl was a reasonably attractive brunette who was witty and funny and very honest and outgoing. I don't like blind dates, but this friend loves to matchmake and was sure we would be the best couple ever. Fast forward to date day. I'm shown a picture of this girl for last reassurances and she looks alright. I'm pretty optimistic. I phone her and we agree to meet at Buffalo Wild Wings for a few drinks and some food on a Thursday night. All good signs of things I can get behind. I agreed to meet her at 8 p.m. I arrive about 7:50 and text her I've arrived and I grab a table since it's busy. She responds that she's on the way. 8 p.m. She's not on time. 8:15, still nothing. I order a drink. 8:25, still nothing. This waitress is flirty and fun though. I order an appetizer. 8:35, still nothing, so I start eating the appetizer. Drink number 2 arrives. 8:45, she still hasn't shown up. No call and no text from her, and it looks like I'm going to be stood up. I should have left 30 minutes ago, but I wanted to not be stuck up and give up on a good friend of one of my best gal pals. Finally, 8:50 comes and the girl arrives, and holy cow, was I in for a surprise. This photo of an athletically built brunette weighing about 120 and standing 5'6" couldn't be any more radically wrong. I'm guessing the photo I was shown was her at like 18 or 19, or a senior picture from high school. Before me is a mildly ridiculous oaf of a woman. Fiery red, curly hair with obviously brunette roots, and 100 pounds over her photo comes over to the table and introduces herself and she says she's sorry she's late and nothing else. We proceeded to have the most awkward 45-minute experience I've ever had. She had terrible body language, awful eye contact. Oh, and she was witty and funny, alright? In that way people say, I'm so funny, aren't I quirky and adorable? Yeah, she was one of those. Annoying as hell. Vapid as hell. About as deep as a toothpaste cap. She pretended her honesty was intelligence, and it definitely wasn't. I'd never been more turned off. So after 45 minutes, we finished our dinner and packed up and went our separate ways. But that lovely waitress came back over and expressed she was happy that I didn't get stood up. And I let her know a good friend set me up, and I told her I would have left if she hadn't been there to keep me company. Got her digits, she's still my girlfriend. Story 17. Internet date horror story. So I had just gone out of a long-term relationship and was being encouraged to get back into the game and not sit around sulking. So I decided to join OkCupid. I decided to message a few girls my first night, and then I largely ignored it for a few weeks until one night I got a response. I checked the girl's pictures out and I thought it a little odd she only had pictures of her face from an angle that sort of ignored the rest of her. But we started talking, and before long, I actually did enjoy speaking with her. And one night out of the blue, she proclaims, "We must meet right now to figure this out because I think I love you." So I agreed to meet her at Starbucks. I'm waiting there and this incredibly large girl shows up and introduces herself. All the while, I'm trying to remain calm and collected. We bought a drink and started talking, and she was actually pretty interesting, except every 2 damn seconds she asked me, "So do you like the way I look? Can you see this happening?" The day continued into dinner when she ordered more food than I could ever consume in one sitting. And I'm not a small guy. And she proceeded to eat it all while talking to me and continually asking me if I liked what I saw. I paid for dinner and was going to politely tell her it just wasn't going to work. She tried to ambush me in the parking lot. It was then and only then that I gained the speed of Neo from the Matrix and hugged her while at the same time avoiding the kiss. She asked me one final time if I liked what I saw, and my response was, "I wouldn't have minded it so much if you hadn't taken a magnifying glass to your insecurities." She then, in an act of pure defiance, pulled out some sort of candy bar from her purse and said, "I'm happy with how I look, and you would have gotten lucky tonight." And you know what? All the power to her. Just don't ask me if I like you every 2 seconds. Story 18. My good friend, Vicky, and her husband, Will, a surgeon, are always trying to set me up. Always. I usually turn down their offers, but they talked up this guy, Ben. He seemed like a great guy. Smart, a doctor, and his TMNT collection was bigger than mine. He took me to a pretty nice place for dinner, and I was kind of nervous, but nothing bad. And then he spilled his drink on purpose. I saw it, so I was like, "What?" Then he started talking like a baby. "Oopsie, I spilled my drink. I'm a white boy." And I was like, "Ben, are you okay?" And he kept at it. Baby talk, looking all coy, and then I'm not making this up, asked if Mommy wanted to hurt her bad boy. I was out of there. I just got up from the table and walked out. He ran after, talking normally, apologizing. I had to wait for my code at CoCheck. I accepted his apology and assured him I wouldn't tell Vicky and Will about his interest. And then he went to hug me, and it lasted a little too long. I pushed him away and, well, there's no polite way of saying it. He whizzed in his pants. I, have no proof, but yeah, he did. Against my leg. I ran away. So yeah, worst date ever. Story 19. It's a fairly long story, but basically, on date number 2, I went number 2, in my pants, in her car. So it was date number 2, and she insisted that she wanted to drive this time. I had no problem with that, and we decided to do the whole dinner and a movie thing. She picked me up at 5, and we headed to Cheeseburger in Paradise. We ate, had a couple drinks, and headed out. We had over an hour before the movie started, so we decided to head out to a little city park that was about a mile from the theater. It was a nice day. Birds singing, not too hot, gentle breeze. Little did I know how hard the coming crash would be. So we're walking the short loop through the park, making small talk. Nothing too interesting when I become acutely aware of that feeling. You know, the one that makes your lower gut feel like it's about to mimic Vesuvius. That or an angry badger has been camping in your gut and now wants out. Right now. I didn't say anything, just let her keep talking while I feverishly looked for a public restroom where I could decimate a stall. No dice. At this point, the urge had settled a bit. I figured the best course of action was to beeline back to her car and go to the theater, where there were sure to be many public restrooms. So we headed back to her car. I should mention at this point that this day was particularly timid, very sweet-natured, but timid to a fault. Like she moved slowly and mousily. Is that even a word? And even drove 5 miles per hour under the speed limit. Just as we pull out the park, the urge comes back. This time, it's not messing around. We make it about 3/4 of a mile when we stop at a red light that had just gone from yellow to red, and now we wait. And wait. And wait. My vision tunneled, and all I could think is, screw you, traffic light, screw you. After what seemed like an eternity, the light changed to green. Mousy Date then proceeds to move at 5 miles per hour maximum speed to get to the movie theater parking lot. Then, as if Thor himself brought his hammer down, there was no holding back. As I white-knuckled her passenger door, the gates let loose with a substance that can only be described as borderline inhuman. I can only describe the subsequent few minutes as a blur because I hauled myself to the theater's bathroom as fast as I could. It didn't really matter, though. What was done was done, witnessed by any number of the bystanders waiting to buy tickets. I wasn't sure who to feel worse for, though. Myself or them for being exposed to it. While I was in the restroom, I texted her, "Just go home." Amazingly, she wanted to stay. I said, "No, seriously, go home." In the days and weeks that followed, the date actually claimed she didn't care at all about the fact that I disgraced her car. She wanted to keep dating. Somehow, I wasn't comfortable dating a girl who was cool with the fact that I took an enormous mess in her car. Later, I was diagnosed by a gastroenterologist with IBS. The event actually created some lasting social anxiety until one day I realized that was a waste of time. And it's a lot more fun to laugh about it. So I do. I mean, I've already made a mess in a date's car. What's the worst I could do? Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.